You reach for a cup and the left hand undoes your shirt. It moves with intent, not tremor. It seeks buttons while your will reaches the other way. Many of us know brief betrayals of the body, a numb foot, a finger that will not obey. Alien hand syndrome is a deeper rupture. A limb acting independently, sometimes grasping, sometimes obstructing, sometimes doing harm. This script traces the clinical discoveries in human cases that turned a curious symptom into a subject of neuroscience and philosophy. We will chart which brain injuries produce which behaviors, read the early neurologist's notes, and follow patients whose hands seem to have a separate life. Stay until the end to learn how a handful of documented cases reshaped ideas about intention, how clinicians learned to manage a rogue limb, and why these rare reports keep haunting medicine and culture. By the time we finish, you will understand the anatomy of agency, the treatments that offer relief, and the unsettling questions these cases still raise. We will examine notable case reports, surgical interventions such as split brain operations, and how clinicians and philosophers have debated what these behaviors mean for personal responsibility and selfhood. If you value deep medical history, subscribe to Tale of History. We unpack real cases that changed how we think. Alien hand syndrome (AHS) describes a condition in which one limb, most often a hand, executes purposeful, complex actions without the individual's conscious intent. Patients experience the hand as autonomous, sometimes even foreign, as though belonging to someone else. Movements include grasping, releasing, gesturing, or manipulating objects in contradiction to the person's will. Unlike tremors or spasms, these actions possess direction and coordination. HS episodes have been documented closing doors the patient has just opened, unbuttoning shirts the other hand is buttoning, and in extreme cases striking or choking the patient. Because awareness remains intact, sufferers describe intense frustration, fear, and shame, a conscious mind forced to watch its own body defy command. Fewer than 200 clinically confirmed cases exist in medical literature. That rarity fuels both fascination and dread. The patient knows every movement yet cannot claim authorship. Some give their alien limb names, attempting to personify what they cannot control. Others avoid public spaces for fear of involuntary gestures. Depression and anxiety commonly accompany long-term cases. Clinicians emphasize that the syndrome strikes individuals who otherwise retain full cognitive capacity, underscoring how selective brain injury can fracture agency without diminishing intellect. Before neurology explained cortical function, such behaviors were interpreted through superstition. Historical records suggest that individuals showing uncontrolled limb activity were sometimes labeled possessed or bewitched. While these accounts lack diagnostic certainty, they reveal how the phenomenon's uncanny nature easily slipped into moral or spiritual frameworks. Only with modern brain imaging and lesion mapping did scientists begin isolating which neural circuits could unleash such autonomous behavior. Researchers now identify three main loci: the frontal lobe, linked to grasping and utilization behaviors; the corpus callosum, whose damage produces hands that compete; and the posterior parietal region, associated with complex, goal-directed yet unintended acts. Each location yields a distinct personality of the alien limb. To understand why damage to a few millimeters of tissue can divide intention from motion, scientists turn to case studies. The early 20th century brought meticulous observation, neurologists documenting every contradictory gesture, each unintended grasp. These clinical diaries, still cited today, form the bridge between myth and measurable anatomy. They show how observation transformed a disturbing curiosity into an avenue for mapping consciousness itself. The difference between a hand that fidgets and one that acts as if possessed lies in the brain's internal geography, a landscape the first neurologists were only beginning to chart. Every movement begins as an electrical intention. In alien hand syndrome, that circuit misfires, not through chaos but through misplaced command. Not random, not reflex, purposeful. To see why, we must travel inside the three principal regions that, when injured, can divide a person's will from their motion. The frontal lobe, seat of planning and voluntary action, sits just behind the forehead. Within it lies the supplementary motor area, the region that initiates movement before awareness catches up. When this area or its neighboring anterior cingulate cortex is damaged by stroke or trauma, the result is what neurologists call frontal variant AHS. The affected hand compulsively touches or grasps nearby objects, even when the person intends to stay still. A spoon on the table becomes irresistible. A stranger's sleeve may be seized. Clinicians describe this as utilization behavior. The hand interprets sight as command. If something can be grasped, it must be. Patients often apologize mid-movement, fully conscious yet powerless to stop the action. Imaging shows that the internal brake, connecting intention and inhibition no longer works. The motor cortex still fires, but the prefrontal network that says don't has gone silent. One hemisphere has lost its governor, leaving the limb obedient only to impulse. At the brain center lies a dense bridge of some 200 million nerve fibers, the corpus callosum. It allows the hemispheres to share intentions so the hands cooperate. Damage or surgical severing of this bridge produces the most dramatic version, callosal variant AHS. Here, each hemisphere acts in isolation. The right hand, directed by the left hemisphere, buttons a shirt. The left hand, ruled by the right hemisphere, unbuttons it. One writes while the other tears the paper away. This tug-of-war is known clinically as intermanual conflict. Such injuries arise after stroke, tumor removal, or corpus callosotomy, a procedure once used to control epilepsy. Because language centers reside mostly in the left hemisphere, the speaking patient can describe what is happening, offering neurologists a live commentary on divided will. One mind, two agendas. Recordings from the 1960s split brain studies revealed each hemisphere capable of independent learning, even independent emotion. The alien hand simply manifests that division in motion. Farther back lies the posterior parietal lobe, integrating sight, touch, and spatial awareness. Lesions here cause the posterior variant AHS, in which the hand executes complex, purposeful sequences, manipulating tools, folding paper, even retrieving items from pockets with uncanny precision. Patients report that the limb behaves intelligently but autonomously, coordinated, graceful, and detached. The phenomenon highlights how the brain can perform high-level motor planning without conscious oversight. It is the same system that lets an experienced musician play while thinking of something else, but in AHS the music plays itself. Identifying which region is damaged depends on lesion mapping through MRI or CT. Common causes include ischemic stroke, traumatic brain injury, tumor resection, and neurodegenerative diseases such as Creutzfeldt-Jakob or Alzheimer's. Each case yields a slightly different behavioral pattern because no two injuries are identical. Neurologists therefore treat AHS as a syndrome family, not a single disorder, a taxonomy written directly on damaged tissue. Early 20th century neurologists were witnessing fragments of this puzzle in their wards, hands that acted without permission, but the full picture would take decades to form. Fade out on the glowing corpus callosum diagram as narration lowers to near whisper. By the dawn of the 20th century, neurology was still a discipline of notebooks and sketches. No MRI, no EEG arrays, only observation. Yet in hospital wards across Europe, physicians were recording behaviors that modern clinicians would instantly recognize. In 1900, German neurologist Dr. Hugo Liepmann documented patients who, after strokes, could move their limbs but failed to carry out purposeful acts. He called the condition apraxia, a disruption between intention and execution. One entry in his Berlin notes described a man asked to light a pipe who grasped the match, stared at it, then attempted to comb his hair. Liepmann concluded that the brain stored action concepts separately from motor strength, a revelation that movement was not merely muscle but planning. Though he never coined alien hand syndrome, Liepmann's meticulous correlation between localized lesions and misplaced action laid the foundation for understanding how fragments of volition could survive in isolation. His diagrams of cortical connections, drawn in pencil, annotated in Latin, would later reappear in textbooks mapping the motor network. A decade later, Dr. Kurt Goldstein, another German neurologist, extended those ideas while treating brain-injured soldiers during World War I. He observed patients whose hands performed elaborate gestures, buttoning, grasping, even saluting without command. In 1908 he published a series of cases noting that the limb executes organized movements which appear purposeful though unintended. Goldstein proposed that the brain functioned as an integrated organism. When one region failed, others might act without central coordination. His writings read almost like existential essays. The patient experiences his limb as an external thing, as though another will had entered it. These pages, rediscovered decades later, stand as the first near-perfect description of what would become alien hand syndrome. Goldstein's insight, that autonomy could emerge from disconnection, shifted the focus of neurology from paralysis to agency. Through the 1930s, 1960s, scattered reports surfaced in European medical journals. Hands that interfered with dressing, limbs that acted out of sync. But because diagnostic imaging was primitive, these remained curiosities, case stories more than science. Everything changed in 1972. Two neurologists, Drive S. Bryan and Dr. J. Jedinak, published a detailed report of a woman whose left hand repeatedly contradicted her right. After tumor surgery affecting her corpus callosum, she tried to button her blouse while the other hand unbuttoned it. Their paper defined two essential diagnostic criteria: loss of voluntary control over the affected limb, sense of foreignness, the feeling that the limb no longer belonged to the self. With those lines, alien hand syndrome entered the clinical lexicon. For the first time, a behavioral oddity had an anatomical anchor. If you're following the medical detective work like so, we can keep making videos that dig this deep. The Brian Jedinak case marked the transition from anecdote to systematic study. Subsequent researchers divided AHS into frontal, callosal, and posterior variants. By classifying symptoms by lesion site, neurologists could now predict which type of alien behavior a patient might display. This taxonomy turned personal tragedy into scientific map-making. Archival footage from the 1980s shows physicians using mirror drawing tests, motion tracking, and primitive video to document each involuntary grasp. Where Lietman and Goldstein relied on sketches, their successors had film, proof that intention could fracture before the camera's lens. Then came surgeries that deliberately separated the hemispheres, and with them, some of the most dramatic accounts of all. By the 1950s, neurosurgery had moved from theory to intervention. The brain was no longer untouchable, it could be entered, corrected, and sometimes divided. Surgeons seeking to halt catastrophic seizures soon uncovered something even more astonishing: the mind's own fault line. Epilepsy surgery was born from desperation. For patients whose seizures leapt from one hemisphere to the other, surgeons proposed cutting the corpus callosum, the dense bridge of fibers linking the two halves of the brain. The idea was pragmatic: if signals could not cross, the storm might stop. Operations began experimentally in the 1940s, becoming more common in the 1960s. Results were often dramatic. Seizure frequency fell, but side effects puzzled even the surgeons. Some patients awoke calm, others reported a strange competition between their hands. Nurses described scenes both comic and unsettling, one hand reaching to pull a blanket up while the other flung it away. A few patients laughed, others wept. The medical notes simply recorded intermanual conflict following commissurotomy. Among the best-known cases was a woman whose seizures ceased after surgery, only to find her left hand behaving as if under different command. She could hold a newspaper, yet the other hand would fold and discard it. Asked about the conflict, she replied, "One of my hands doesn't agree with me." Psychologists realized these gestures revealed each hemisphere acting semi-independently. When an image was shown to the right visual field, the patient named it. When shown only to the left, the right hemisphere guided the left hand to draw it, but the patient could not verbalize what she had drawn. Conscious knowledge split cleanly along the surgical line. The cut that stopped seizures also exposed a divided will. These operations sparked debate even among neurosurgeons. Was seizure relief worth fragmenting consciousness? Informed consent standards were still evolving, and few patients could have predicted the odd behaviors that followed. Yet for many, the alternative was lethal epilepsy. Medical boards eventually ruled the procedure acceptable for severe, medication-resistant cases, emphasizing that alien hand symptoms were rare and often temporary. Still, the operations forced medicine to confront a question philosophers had asked for centuries: could unity of mind survive the knife? One of the most cited modern examples is Karen Brine, a New Jersey patient treated in the late 20th century for uncontrollable epilepsy. After her corpus callosotomy, the seizures stopped, but her left hand began acting independently. It stubbed out cigarettes she tried to light, hit objects, even slapped her face. She described living with a second personality from the wrist down. Doctors noted that distraction worsened the episodes. Giving the hand an object to hold often calmed it. Such simple behavioral strategies became part of early therapy protocols. Surgery had exposed the limits of control but also offered clues on how to reclaim it. From these surgical cases emerged practical insight. Medications such as antiepileptics reduced involuntary impulses. Behavioral conditioning, keeping the alien limb occupied, reduced episodes. In persistent forms, botulinum toxin injections temporarily weakened overactive muscles, allowing rest. Clinicians emphasized empathy. Patients were aware of their actions, mortified by them, and needed reassurance that the condition reflected injury, not madness. A hand at war with its owner required both science and compassion. Surgery revealed the brain's division. Modern therapy revealed something else: resilience. The scalpel showed that the mind could be divided. Modern medicine would spend the next half-century learning how to stitch control back together. By the 1980s and 1990s, better imaging and postoperative follow-ups transformed scattered case notes into organized data. Fewer than 200 verified instances of alien hand syndrome appeared worldwide, but each offered insight into how the brain relearns command. Clinicians documented three main therapeutic paths: pharmacological, behavioral, and occupational. None were perfect, all were inventive. The challenge was not to silence the hand but to retrain the brain. Because many patients developed AHS after stroke or epilepsy surgery, neurologists turned first to existing anti-seizure drugs, benzodiazepines and carbamazepine, to dampen errant impulses. Others tested neuromuscular blocking agents, temporarily weakening the limb's overactive muscles. More recently, small clinical trials have used botulinum toxin type A injections, reducing excessive grip reflex for several weeks. Physicians caution that the effect is purely mechanical. The hand grows still, but the impulse remains. The treatment must therefore pair with behavioral retraining. Rehabilitation specialists discovered that giving the rogue limb a task reduced misbehavior. Patients were taught to hold an object continuously, a stress ball, a towel, a lightweight tool, keeping sensory circuits busy. Mirror therapy sessions allowed patients to watch both hands move together, rebuilding the visual motor link between hemispheres. Some patients learned to issue verbal cues aloud, left hand, stop, and reported partial success. The command itself mattered less than the renewed sense of ownership. Repetition rebuilt authority, one movement at a time. Loss of agency carries emotional cost. Depression and social withdrawal are common. Some patients name their hand, George, Lefty, or even the other one, as a coping strategy. One woman interviewed in a 2015 rehabilitation study said, "If I treat it like a child, I can forgive it when it misbehaves." Another admitted that she avoided handshakes for fear the alien limb would refuse to let go. Psychologists now encourage externalization without dehumanization, acknowledging the hand's independence while reinforcing the self's unity. Support groups for stroke survivors often include AHS patients, focusing on humor and peer empathy. Naming the hand is not surrender, it is negotiation. Modern neurology has forced courts and ethicists to confront rare questions. If an alien hand injures someone, who is responsible? Case reviews in medical law journals treat AHS as automatism, akin to reflex, absolving criminal intent. Yet patients themselves often feel moral distress, knowing the act occurred through their body. Hospitals now combine neurological and psychological counseling, addressing guilt alongside function. The objective is not merely to stop unwanted motion but to restore a sense of authorship. If you want the full references and sourced case notes in the description, tap subscribe and hit the bell, we'll put everything there. Several patients regain partial voluntary control within months. MRI follow-ups show neuroplastic compensation, adjacent regions assuming lost roles. A 2019 case documented a man who, after 6 months of daily practice, could suppress the alien grasp by simply imagining a closed fist. Clinicians emphasize that improvement seldom means cure, yet adaptation itself demonstrates the brain's flexibility. Behind every charted recovery lies countless repetitions, countless small victories over a rebellious limb. The will can be rebuilt, fiber by fiber. If parts of volition can be split across tissue, what does that mean for responsibility? By the time alien hand syndrome reached medical textbooks, its meaning had outgrown medicine. What began as neurology's curiosity had become a mirror for philosophy. When the brain divides, what happens to the idea of I? Every voluntary act involves an invisible hierarchy: desire, decision, command, movement. HS collapses that order. The motor cortex fires without permission, the will discovers it was bypassed. Clinical scans confirm the mechanism. Impulses arise in damaged frontal or callosal pathways milliseconds before awareness registers them. Yet the patient still feels responsible for the outcome. The body acts, the mind apologizes. This gap unsettles centuries of philosophy. Descartes' cogito assumed thought ruled action. AHS proves action can precede thought. The condition therefore stands not only as neurological rarity but as evidence that consciousness may be a witness, not a commander. When a limb behaves violently, ethics collide with anatomy. Legal scholars classify such movements under automatism, absolving intent. But patients rarely feel absolved. A 1994 forensic review recounts a man who struck his spouse during an episode. Investigators confirmed callosal damage. Charges were dismissed, yet he insisted on psychiatric counseling, saying, "It was my hand, my fault, even if my brain disagreed." Philosophers call this the paradox of embodied guilt. knowing you are not in control yet feeling accountable. The phenomenon reshapes how responsibility is taught in medical ethics courses worldwide. Split-brain research revealed that each hemisphere can generate awareness of its own. Experiments showed one hand arranging objects while the speaking hemisphere denied knowledge of the act. In that instant, two consciousnesses inhabited one skull. Unity, it turns out, is optional. Modern theorists such as Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga argued that the interpreter, in the left hemisphere, invents narratives to preserve coherence. Alien hand syndrome exposes that invention. When the story no longer matches the motion, the illusion fractures, revealing how fragile the sense of self truly is. Few neurological disorders have entered popular imagination as completely. In 1964, long before clinicians formalized the syndrome, Stanley Kubrick released Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Actor Peter Sellers' gloved right hand repeatedly snaps into a Nazi salute while his character fights to suppress it. The image was absurd, hilarious, and disturbing, a mechanical rebellion echoing the yet unnamed syndrome. Decades later, journalists coined the nickname Dr. Strangelove syndrome. The label stuck. Popular references in films, novels, and television reduced the condition to dark comedy, but also introduced millions to an idea neurologists were still struggling to define. Today, research reframes AHS not as possession or parody but as a window into motor autonomy. Neuroimaging reveals parallel networks that plan, execute, and inhibit actions. Damage removes inhibition, leaving the execution intact. Every patient tested provides another map point for understanding voluntary motion, motor intention, and consciousness. Laboratories use robotic gloves and motion sensors to quantify recovery. Philosophers attend the same conferences as neurologists. The syndrome bridges the humanities and neuroscience like few other conditions. A hand once seen as cursed became proof that the will can be measured. Despite progress, puzzles remain. Why do some patients recover full control while others remain divided? Why does awareness persist even when command fails? Ongoing studies using functional MRI suggest that motor signals in AHS arise from intact subcortical structures, bypassing conscious networks. Researchers suspect that future therapies, combining brain-computer interfaces with neurofeedback, might allow patients to retrain intention directly, closing the circuit their injuries opened. For now, treatment remains pragmatic. Occupy the hand, strengthen attention, rebuild confidence. Across a century of research, from Liepman's sketches to digital neural scans, alien hand syndrome has traced one persistent theme: the struggle for unity inside the human frame. It revealed that control is not absolute, that the self is negotiated every second among billions of neurons. For medicine, the syndrome clarified pathways of motion. For philosophy, it redrew the boundary between mind and body. For those who live with it, it proved that identity can endure even when obedience falters. The will is not a command, it is a conversation. Support Evidence First History, subscribe to Tale of History, comment with questions to keep history alive.